before the date or 20 days maximum.
Afterwards.
Yes. But now the president has the powers to extend, to amend and to extend this period. And this provision for him is in the Electoral Act 2014, Electoral Act of number 5 of 2014, section 64 1B. You can read it for yourself just to understand where this is all coming from. But let's talk about the interview that you had.
Before we go to the interview, let's just quickly put it into context.
Yeah.
Of course, the ECN polling station voting time extended, and that follows after massive pressure from the opposition parties wanting to have the results of Wednesday's election declared null and void.
Yes.
There was a huge meeting yesterday between the ECN or the political parties, but not the ECN, but by the political parties themselves. They have actually now united in their drive to try and salvage the democratic right of Namibians. But I think this was the ECN's way to sort of mitigate the situation as pressure increasingly grows to declare the results null and void. Coming back to the interview I lined up, I spoke to Roland Brown. He is an economist, an analyst. He's also the co-founder of Ceres Capital. I spoke to him this morning in view of the ECN announcement, and Ceres has been tracking elections and analysing trends for months. Let's have a look at that interview. Good morning to Roland Brown. He's the co-founder of Ceres Capital, analyst, economist, and a number cruncher of a note. Robert, let's get to the chase straight away. The extension of some of the voting at polling stations. Have you done the math? Will it be enough, and can it make a significant impact?
Thanks, Joe. I think the key thing here that we have to recognize is that this process now lacks credibility. And with a process lacking credibility, it's very, very difficult to see how anyone could possibly think that the outcome can have any credibility. And this is now something that the ECN has effectively admitted to in this opening of a handful of polls again, that a number of Namibians have been denied a constitutional right to vote because of an absolute hash up of the whole process. So the process lacks credibility. There cannot be a conclusion other than the outcome lacks credibility as well. And if you look at what we see now with this latest story, there's going to be a handful of polls around the country open, but there's no clarity in terms of what those or why those stations are open, or how they came to the number of stations in different areas. So there's no stations opening in the south, there's no stations opening in Erongo, and there's one station opening in Khomas. Now, what we see from the bits and pieces of numbers that are coming in here is that most of the Khomas stations only managed to process between, say, 900 and 1,500 votes. At the same time, there's a constituency in Erongo that's reporting 9,955 votes, which is one every 7 seconds, I think it is, 6 or 7 seconds. There must have been a ballot paper dropping in the box for each of the elections. So for the presidential and for the National Assembly. So the numbers, the plausibility of this actually addressing any of the issues in Khomas is basically zero, and in Erongo, obviously, people aren't getting a further chance to vote. And where one has to become a bit skeptical here, and not be nice and polite about it, but where we have to be skeptical is to say these are the areas in which the incumbent party is less likely to do well, where there seem to be very, very few booths being open. And if you just look at these numbers that I've mentioned, so a single polling station opening in Khomas means that on a good day, there'll be 1,500 people processed there. So in 2 days, 3,000 people. And by our estimate, there's probably around 100,000 people that haven't had a chance to vote in Khomas. that's assuming that no people are coming in from outside of Khomas and voting in Khomas. That's just Khomas registered voters. And so from that perspective, it's wholly inadequate. Now, what I'm fearful of is that people have sort of viewed this election now to be something of a farce, some of the people in Windhoek, and you won't get these long queues at the voting stations. And then that will be used as an excuse later on for why it was actually adequate. But in reality, what if it is indeed correct that that Erongo West station was able to process 9,955 people, then the question is, why were there no stations in Windhoek, or in Khomas, the region with the most registered voters? Why were there no stations in Windhoek doing similar kind of numbers? And that, again, you have to cast aside the politeness and say, why was Windhoek being slowed down? Why was the voting in Windhoek so slow when compared to some of these other areas? And I think that these are becoming questions where we have to start to question whether this is just a competency issue.
Very insightful comments there, Roland. All this whole wave of things that have happened in terms of incompetency, does that allow for a precedent for the opposition to take a legal recourse? Do you see that happening after the election? And would there be a chance of that being effective?
Well, I think that the first thing is, whether it's incompetence or not, a number of people have not been able to cast their votes. Not because of any wrongdoing on their part, but because of the fact that the process was such a disaster. People were turned away from stations because of no ballots, no ballot papers, too late for them to join other queues and things of this nature. Stations closed when they weren't supposed to, things of this nature. So just procedurally, a number of people were denied the opportunity to cast their vote, and that's a constitutional right. So I think from that perspective, there certainly should be a legal challenge. Whether that legal challenge will be successful or not is hard to say. The courts are notoriously unpredictable when it comes to this, as we saw from the peculiar 2019 ruling, the ruling on the 2019 election. So there certainly should be a challenge, I would think. The challenge that we see now is that with the sort of tainting of the process, and as mentioned, that a tainted process can only result in a tainted outcome, or questionable. I mean, this isn't to say that there will be a completely incorrect outcome, but you cannot trust the outcome if the process followed isn't correct. And I think with that process not being followed correctly, we are now sitting in a position where it's difficult to see how you can salvage it. Already you see on social media people saying things like, oh, my ink will be gone by Saturday, so I'll go and vote again. Obviously, I presume there's some checks in place to avoid something like that happening. But we do just now have this completely tainted process. And as a result, it's very difficult to say that we'll have an outcome that people can get behind and trust. And so in my mind, it looks as if the only credible option is to have the whole this whole election set aside and start again, which is certainly not something anyone wants to hear. And frankly, I would be doubtful if it happens, but it is what should happen in my mind. The other thing here that I'm increasingly concerned about is that if you have a narrow margin victory in the winner takes all ballot, which is the presidential ballot, for the incumbent party's candidate, I think that you may see some unrest, which is obviously something that the country definitely doesn't want. But if there's a 10, 15, 20,000 votes difference, I could certainly see that people would say, but had everybody in Khomas, had everyone in Erongo, had everyone in the South, etc., been able to vote, this outcome may well have been very different. And that would be a completely legitimate position. Obviously, to resort to violence after that would be a bad idea. But that would be a completely legitimate position to say that, this very fine margin result may not be very legitimate.
Roland, from the bits and pieces that we're getting from collation centers, have you guys been able to establish a trend?
Not really. What we do see is that the trend is more like, or the bits and pieces that we see suggest that the South SWAP has done slightly better in the South than we expected, but done a bit worse in Erongo. The northern votes are very patchy at the moment, so it's quite difficult to say there. But it looks as if it will be a pretty tight result at this point, without a lot of clarity on what the 4Os have done specifically. It's difficult to see whether there will be a convincing victory for the incumbents, or whether they'll fall short of the mark on the parliamentary side. On the presidential side, it's even more difficult to call. And with the parliamentary election, obviously, if you're 49 versus 51, the difference doesn't matter that much. It's less electorally relevant. But with the presidential result, a very fine margin one vote can basically be the difference between one candidate and the runoff.
Roland, thank you very much for your insights. Have a great day.
You too.
Well, Joe, what a very insightful conversation you had there with Roland Brown. I mean, everything he has said really speaks to the current times that we are facing right now. But before we move forward, perhaps, with our conversation, walk us through the stats again. What's happening with these 4 polling stations?
These 4 regions in which the polling stations are, and we'll refer back to some of the comments that Roland from Sirius has made. Okay, so let's start with Kunene.
Yeah.
In Kunene, there are 3,000 registered voters. But now they've got 22 polling stations running today and tomorrow. Now, in contrast, Oshikoto has got 111,000 registered voters. They have 1 polling station, only 1. Oshona has got 25,000 polling registered voters. They've got 5 polling stations. And then the big white elephant in the room, Khomas, we've got more than 280,000 registered voters. That does not include migrant workers that might come in to vote here. So we've got 280,000, more than that, registered voters in Khomas. We've got 1, just 1. Extra polling station in Khomas. And Roland broke that down rather nicely. According to their estimates, there's about 100,000, at least 100,000 people in Khomas that were registered that haven't been able to cast their votes, that will now have to do it in these 2 days. They, on average, if everything goes fine at a polling station, they can process a polling station in Khomas. They were able to process about 1,500 votes a day. We've got at least 100,000 people who haven't been able to vote, and this 1 polling station in Khomas, on a good day, will have the capacity to process 3,000 votes. So there you have it. There's no way that registered voters in Khomas can exercise their right to vote fairly and democratically. What is also very important, we've just seen some footage in Khomas, the 1 polling station at Transnamib. Once again, we have a long queue. Why is this happening?
All right. Now, before we continue with this conversation, we are just going to quickly cross over to Leandre. She is on call, and we will be chatting with her right now. Leandre, can you hear us?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please walk us through the activities happening today.
Okay, so basically, it's sort of like a hostage situation here in Erongo, if I can call it like that. Basically, in terms of our coalition centers here in Walvis Bay, Swakopmund, even Karibop constituency, results have been or have started loading onto the system, but now it's just hanging. And they can't do anything. This is from yesterday. They can't do anything in terms of collating these results, because everybody's now waiting to see what the different constituencies did in these in the election on the 27th of November. Then at the same time, there's a lot of sentiments that people are a bit worried, like how can these elections be declared free and fair if only now certain polling stations have been opened, while here in Erongo, no polling stations have opened for the next 2 days, or for today and tomorrow. Because our biggest issue that we had here, especially in Walvis Bay, especially in Swakopmund, is the fact that the queues were so long. We had people standing in a queue for 18 hours just to cast their vote. So a lot of the people were determined to cast their vote, but then also at some of the polling stations, we heard that a lot of the youth decided, like, no, they don't have the patience for this. They are leaving. Specifically here in Walvis Bay as well, polling stations were accommodating voters until, or had people cast their votes up until 3 o'clock in the morning, and only from there on, their voting, or from there on, the counting started at the end of the day. But like I said, basically everybody is now in limbo land. They're waiting to hear something from either from the regional office here at ECN, or headquarters, in terms of the way forward now, in terms of the system that's just being stuck now.
Andre, we understand that the 140,441 registered voters in the Erongo region, with this extension, Erongo has been excluded. How are the people on the ground feeling? And can we guarantee that everyone who was registered to vote had voted?
Oh, no, definitely. There was a lot of chaos here in Walvis Bay, especially with the mobile polling stations. And chatting to some of the returning officer here in Walvis Bay, some of these stations accommodated about 1,100 people, 1,200 people at the end of the day. So like I just said, definitely not everybody voted here in the Erongo region. A lot of the people were like, nope, I'm not going to stand in a queue for 18 hours. And then just left and just gave up on the whole process at the end of the day. Yeah, especially in Walvis Bay, what happened is people were moving to mobile polling stations. At the Walvis Bay airport, which was also a mobile polling station, chaos broke out, because what happened, people were only allowing 5 people at a time inside to vote. But then it was a mobile polling station, so there was only a certain time that they could stay at this polling station. So a lot of the people could not vote at the Walvis Bay airport, who were standing in the queue, because that polling station had to move now to the next point. And that next point was Farm 37, where chaos also broke out at the end of the day, because the residents of Farm 37 were angry that they now have to stand in a very long queue while the station is set up for them there, and people from Walvis Bay were coming to Farm 37 to try and vote. The same issue happened at Utusep, where people were driving from Walvis Bay to Utusep to go and vote, and then the Utusep residents were like, we're walking and we are using donkey cars to come to the polling station, and now people with cars are driving to Utusep to come and vote. And the situation what transpired there about 10 o'clock or when it was supposed to close is that they were now getting the Utusep residents to first vote, and they were encouraging the people that were still in the queue to go to the next mobile station to go and queue there and to go and vote there.
All right, Leandre, I understand, or I think we can all agree that there is an appetite to vote. Now, Erongo has been excluded. Has there been any complaints laid against the ECN for excluding Erongo, or we are just taking it as it is?
Social media is buzzing, especially the WhatsApp groups is buzzing. It's like people like asking. This morning I was at the Walvis Bay Rural constituency office, and the returning officer she kept on getting called, and where she had to tell like the people, no, Erongo is excluded from this list. There's no special voting, or there's no extension on the voting. So a lot of the people that did not get the chance to vote on Wednesday, the hunger is still there, and it's kind of like a disappointment. There's also anger about the fact that Erongo has been excluded in this extension today and tomorrow.
All right, Leandre, now what happens when you pass midnight?
I'm sorry?
What happens when you pass them?
The deadline at the polling stations. What happened then?
Oh,
Yeah.
the deadline.
Yeah,
This is basically, mhm. Is it in terms of the voting or in terms of the
yeah,
results?
your experience of that.
Oh, we are so. I'm just so worried about our officials on this side because they've been trying to get everything done and get everything loaded, but um the system is now just stuck at the end of the day. So what happened here in terms of the voting on Wednesday evening, as soon as it was at 9 o'clock, a lot of the polling stations here had gates. So people were allowed to come inside of the yard, basically, and then a police officer was stationed at the back to ensure that nobody comes at 10 o'clock and tries to cut into the line or so and try to cast their vote. So basically, everybody that was in the queue by 9 o'clock had the opportunity to vote.
Maybe we should
And
try and
then
get Otis.
at the opportunity to vote, and then which basically took up until 3 o'clock here in Walfish Bay. The same thing happened in Swakopmund as well. People that were in the queue were assisted up until the last vote was cast. Now, basically, we have one situation here in Walfish Bay where the constituency office has to be used for an exam hall. So basically what they've done is they've now moved the laptop where the verification is just hanging into a car so that the examinations can take place in the one hall. The one hall that's also placed here at the school, one of the teachers like, is this people not done yet? It's like, nah, unfortunately, no, the system is just hanging. Everybody's now just waiting for the system to, I don't know, jumpstart or miracle needs to happen for the collated results to be announced.
So much for bringing us this comprehensive report from Erongo region.
Thank you.
All right, now, Jo Marie, we understand, that this extension of this result is causing a queue again. People are still queuing up. So what measures can ECN take, or do you think they were supposed to take to ensure that we do have a smooth sailing election process and that it doesn't inconvenience people?
Well, the mind simply boggles.
Yeah.
They've had Wednesday to see what went wrong.
Yes.
So obviously, there's no thought being put into the situation in Khomas. How can you have only one polling station in a region with more than 280,000 registered voters, of whom maybe half didn't get the chance to go to the poll? Obviously, they had to have more polling stations. They had to have more officers that could process these people. It begs the question, and that is something that is now increasingly coming not only from the public and via social media, but from analysts and people who are monitoring this. Has the voting process in Khomas been deliberately slowed down?
That's a good question.
Because you do have a very strong opposition force in Khomas. So earlier in our interview, we had that example in Kavango West, where a polling station were able to process more than 9,000 people in one day.
Yeah.
In Khomas, we were lucky if we got 1,000.
Yeah.
Why? It's not, it's just fueling speculation and discrediting the ECN totally and utterly.
Do you think that the measures of communications that were taken were effective? For instance, extending the registration period, and that information is disseminated through the media. But we also have people in the villages, perhaps, who might not have any sorts of communication. Maybe they don't have social media, maybe their radios are off or TVs are off. Do you think the model of communication, the modality of communication rather, was effective?
The ECN, as such, I do think that there were, plenty of information flying around. The problem is that we still saw a lot of voters that were unsure about the process, how it worked, etc. And once they got to these polling stations, a lot of them weren't briefed properly, and that once again slow down the process, because you also only had a very limited number of people operating in the polling stations that could quickly disseminate this information.
All right, Jo Marie, let's quickly cross over to Patricia Kutsia in the Khomas region. Patricia is at Namib. Patricia, the queue is longer than I can imagine. What's happening there?
Yes, the queue is quite long here at Namib, but I did speak to some of the voters and they say that luckily it's moving quite fast.
We have 281,923 registered voters. And there are those who missed this opportunity on Wednesday. Do you think everyone would be accommodated today, seeing that the station was open at 7 and it will close at 9?
Yes, I'm seeing that it's moving pretty fast since I've arrived. A number of people have already gone in. So I do think we might be able to accommodate everyone here.
What's the general feeling on the ground? Like, what are people saying? Are people excited? Are people disappointed? What's the feeling?
I can see that a lot of them are really calm, those that I spoke to. The energy is quite low, but at least it's calm and they're just ready to go in and cast their votes. Honestly, I think a few of them, as they mentioned, they can't wait for this to be over.
Patricia, we'd like to get a more holistic picture of the number of voters there. As we talk, could you just walk around, along the line so that we can get an idea of how many people there are? Also, have you been inside the polling station? Do we have an idea of the ECN's manpower inside the station, if there's more?
I have not had the opportunity to go inside yet. I've just been speaking to the voters outside. But from the offices, everything seems to be smoothly. The media is allowed to move in and out of the polling station.
So as soon as you get a chance, maybe not in this interview, but of course for our social media platforms, etc., where we run breaking news all the time, could you take a look inside the polling station so that we can get an idea of how many voting booths there are inside that station?
No, definitely I will make my way to the inside of the polling station.
Thank you so much for bringing us this report from Khomas region. We will be crossing over to you at other junctures of this live Election Watch broadcast.
Okay.
Did you see that line?
I saw the line.
Wow, did you see that line?
I saw the line. A lot of people are really, really excited to vote. But I want to find out from you, how will this extension affect the timeline for vote counting, as well as the announcement of the results? When can we expect these results?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, because not only do we have new votes coming in, but we've seen from reports from the region that there's a huge delay on the collation of these results.
Yeah.
Now, partly because the ECN's internet capacity, they've got internet problems, so they can't load the results on the system. Traditionally in elections, Namibia is rather slow to, release the final figure, etc. So I don't think we'll get those final results. I think we'll be lucky if we get it late next week.
All right. We have the stats for the constituencies that are done counting right now.
Yes.
We have 3 out of 121 constituencies. That is Gibeon, Aranos, and
Keetmans.
Yeah.
So those are the constituency results, and we have them. Maybe we can get them on our screen to just take a look at that again.
All right, but before we get that information coming through to us, maybe we can just continue our conversation here. Maybe let's talk about the lessons that, you think ECN should learn from this experience and that it's not repeated next time.
Right. Well, this is the third day and there's been a tremendous amount of frustration. So wait, let's go back to those to those results there. So that is Karasburg East. That is the National Assembly votes, and we see there SWAPO in the parliamentary election coming out on top with 1,997, followed rather closely by the LPM at 1,949, the IPC coming in at 795. So that is the situation in Karasburg East, that constituency. In terms of the presidential votes, we've got Ntumbu, Nandi and Daitwa coming out on top at 2,167 votes, followed by Swartboy at 1,920 and Penduleni Itula at 945. Of course, we know that Karasburg, or that the South, the LPM has a lot of support there, so that also reflected in these stats.
And we will be bringing the stats to you live as they come, as they come in.
As they come,
us,
of course, on our social media, on our chatbot. Let's take a look at the National Assembly results for the Gibeon constituency. We've got the LPM coming out at 1,561, as we've said, the LPM very strong in the South, followed by SWAPO at 1,185 and the IPC at 105. Let's take a look at the presidential results for the Gibeon constituency. Swartboy leading there with 1,544, followed by Nandi and Daitwa at 1,267 and Itula at 1,153. So that is the Gibeon constituency situation, and no real surprises there. We know that the LPM is strong in the South.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, let's continue with our conversation, Joe, and perhaps let's talk about what transpired last night, the big announcement. You know, other media houses were excluded and NBC was included. As a journalist, how does that make you feel being sidelined on such an important day?
As I say, this is the third day. Everybody's frustrated. So me too, I'm not nice anymore. I'm fuming. I'm obviously fuming, as I'm sure all my colleagues are.
Yeah.
Number one, this is not transparent.
Yeah.
Number two, this is not democratic.
Yes.
Number three, what is the ECN thinking? They're fueling the fires of, rigging and unfair practices, etc. Besides the fact that they giving preference to the government mouthpiece, which once again says, okay, then the information we get isn't objective. The bits that are coming out of the ECN, it's too little.
Yes.
There's this blackout. There's this stonewall when you try and contact the ECN and say there's confusion, like for instance, on the fixed and the mobile polling stations.
Yeah.
We've been trying to get clarification since last night. They excuse me for being so blunt, but they just don't care.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, but the ECN has taken a massive credibility blow in this election. How they're going to come back from this, quite frankly, I don't know.
And what do you think is the role that the media plays in safeguarding electoral integrity, now that you have said what you are not happy with?
Of course, there's a reason why the media is the fourth estate.
Yes.
We are crucial in the process to ensure objective, factual information being fed to the public as much as possible. And independent media in Namibia, we have a good track record of doing that. But obviously, we do have to rely on, in situations like that, on a body like the ECN.
Yeah.
So of course we can source the information or surrounding information from our people on the ground in the regions, from political parties. But the ECN can't just, go numb. And then after the fact, probably will come back and say the media reported incorrectly or they were biased, but you're not talking to us.
Yes.
You're not talking to us. You're talking to the government mouthpiece with exclusive access to information. Quite frankly, that is a boycott of independent media in Namibia.
Yeah. All right. Before we sign out here, Jo Marie, I just wanted to get perhaps your opinion on this. Opposition political party members have said, particularly Knowledge Ipinge, has said that the fact that IPC took the ECN to court possibly, fueled these incompetencies by the ECN, seeing that the EVM machines were removed and ballot papers were introduced. Do you share the same opinion?
Look, I think the court said obviously that there had to be a paper trail. We voted with paper before.
Yes.
We didn't see the absolute chaos that we
are seeing right now.
Also, that ruling didn't come yesterday. The ECN had 4 years to get its house in order. We've had previous elections. It can be done. That's absolutely no excuse for the complete and utter chaos that is reigning at the moment. Also, it's not just about the paper. It's their systems don't work. How can you not have enough batteries for ultraviolet verifying machines? How come you have to restart machines every half an hour because they're crashing? Now they can't get collated results onto the ECN mainframe. Come on, people. It's just complete and utter incompetency.
Yeah, and there were reports that, journalists were being harassed by the police during, I think on Wednesday, during the election day itself. Do you think that would continue in today and tomorrow?
I think that's probably going to get worse. What we saw in certain regions, especially at first, the media was extremely welcomed. We enjoyed access. The polling officers were friendly. But as the media exposed the incompetency, it started to, shut down. At the moment, of course, the ECN has apparently no time for the independent media, so they will be stonewalled, and yes, there will be instances of harassment.
Yeah.
As it is, independent media never is very popular when it comes to elections. And when they expose massive incompetency on this scale, it's going to become tougher.
All right. And maybe finally, Jo, opposition parties, do you feel that they are happy with this decision to extend? Because some of them were calling for the cancellation of this whole election process and let's start over. But now ECN and the president have said, no, we're not starting over. We are just going to continue. What do you think opposition parties are feeling right now? And do you potentially think that ECN would be taken to court again?
Well, I think the ECN's decision to open extra voting opportunities in 4 of Namibia's 14 regions, only 4, that is only going to add fuel to the opposition's fire. Because obviously, once again, Namibians have not been given a fair chance to exercise their constitutional right to vote. So no, I don't think the opposition is going to be happy with this at all. In terms of a possible court case, the ECN has been taken to court for a lot less issues than what is going on here. So I do think that it is definitely something that's being discussed. What I found very encouraging yesterday when they're meeting with the ECN and the opposition parties, or the political parties, all the political parties, didn't happen as scheduled. It was very encouraging to see that all the opposition parties came together and said, okay, let's put pressure on the ECN, because what you do not need right now is a divided opposition.
Yes.
This is no longer about a party or an ego or a leader. This is about the opposition in Namibia.
Yeah.
And if they stand together and operate as one, then they might have some power to come back.
All right, Jo Marie, thank you so much for joining us on Election Watch. At 12 to 1, Toivo and Glenora will be continuing this conversation. And until then, have a happy democracy time.